Greetings everybody. My name is Anton. I'm the creator of a YouTube channel Monaverantus, which is dedicated to analyzing the music of The Lord of the Rings. In late August, I made an introductory analysis of the themes of the Rings of Power, 1 week after the release of the official soundtrack and 1 week before the show aired. Bear McCreary, the composer of the score, saw it. So now, a couple of months later, I've had the great pleasure to sit down and talk with him about the deeper intricacies of his work. Needless to say, this will be full of spoilers. If you're not familiar with the score, I suggest watching my video, or read his blog posts, or watch any of the other interviews he's done in the last months. If you're anything like me, you'll probably listen to this and not watch, so anytime I put some text or visuals on screen, you'll hear this. And if you stick around for the ending, you just might get some exclusive Season 2 content. Now let's kick it off. You got Rings of Power and God of War in very quick succession. You won the Game Awards prize for the best score by Animal, no less. And you got to perform. You got to perform along with Osher on that stage, who is apparently a huge man.
Yeah, he's
crazy year.
Yeah. It's been for me, it's almost like a dream having all these projects come out at the same time. I don't mean to jump ahead of your question, but many people ask me, "Oh, how do you do all this?" But the truth is, these projects span years. I mean, I worked on Rings of Power for about a year, a little less. But God of War Ragnarok, I've been on for almost 4 years. I mean, it's a video game takes a long period of time. And in fact, I was I just posted a blog entry about it. Yesterday of this taping, and you know, I was in the middle of writing it. I was in the middle of writing it when the pandemic hit, which tells you, you know, how long I've been on it. So it does make it feel like I've had a very busy year. But in fact, 2022 has been, the beginning of it was busy as I was finishing up Rings of Power, but the second half has actually been me having a chance to recharge the batteries a little bit.
Yeah, well, sure, I understand, but like, we, the audience, of course, only see like the end product. So for us, it might seem like, wow, crazy year for you, huh? But for you, this is like the final stage of the process. But still, I mean, like, you now at last have the chance to like see the, you know, the rewards, whatever you can call it, of actually getting to see audience reaction and I suppose a certain amount of analysis and interaction, like in my case. Just I guess I gotta ask out of curiosity, since me and the audience get to consume and like dissect your work a lot. Now that I actually got the chance to make something about you, did you have any opinion on it?
Yeah, your video in August was one of the first sort of analyses. It was one of that I saw from the fan community and from the music community, and it was I thought it was great. I mean, it was very validating, to be honest, that I thought that there were all these things that I had placed in the music, and the show had not come out yet. And
yeah, exactly. I was very keen on making sure that it was before the show had started.
Yeah, so I thought, like, well, this is as pure a test as my music can endure, because you're just listening. You have the context of the broad strokes of the story and the trailers, but you really don't know the story. And of course, the music was spanning the entire season. I mean, in a way, I was nervous about spoiling the entire show, but I was, you know, careful about the way I presented the cues and what cues I put out. But it was really cool seeing all the things that you were picking up on, and some of the things that you picked up on later as the show, you know, aired. But it's like that that initial response was really cool. And if I'm not mistaken, did you have a theory about Where the Shadows Lie having text?
I've saved the comment that I made on the John Williams fan forum, where I actually deduced like the melodies and how they fit along with the words. But I chose not to put that in the video because I thought you would be very keen on keeping that a bit secret.
Well, yes and no. I was very amused that you picked that up. But in a way, I mean, I feel like maybe you and I are the same in this way. I thought it was so obvious. It was so obvious because something about that melody is very vocal. I mean, to me, a vocal melody and an instrumental melody are very different things, because a vocal melody communicates text, and text has other rhythmic requirements. You just need sometimes extra syllables to communicate what you're saying. So, you know, like, oh, maybe I got a little piano here and I don't have to sing it.
Yeah, I got mine too.
Yeah. So you have like, you know, like this melody. It's so efficient. It's so there's no wasted note. It's very instrumental. All those repeated notes are like, they're an indicator to me that there's text, right? Like if I had written that as an instrumental melody, in fact, hold on, I got my system up here. Are these gonna work? It'd be like,
you see, I think pop songs, for example, they can stay on the same note like for a whole bar. Da, 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 da.
For a whole song. There are, I mean, so many top 40 songs that live within a major third. Yeah. And when you really analyze the melody, it's like na 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 na. That's it. And it's all about the lyric and the attitude. And whoops. So yeah, I thought to me, I was like, oh, this melody is so obviously a vocal melody that everyone will know. And then you look at the title. But anyway, I was amused actually that you seem to be the first, if not the only one, immediately to piece that together. So I
know that I'm not the only one, because almost directly after I posted that video to Reddit, somebody else said that they had noticed the same thing. But in my case, like my explanation would be that, you know, that the title was instrumental. That was the thing that started getting me going, like, where the shadows light, that's in the universe, etc. And not only that, there's also, oh, I forgot the composer's name, but there was a PC game called The War of the Ring that was released around the same time that you know, the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out, and it starts with this ring verse in Black Speech that I always thought was so cool, like and I always thought that there was such a missed opportunity with the Howard Shore score not to have like the official ring verse take like somewhere in that score. So I kind of was like on a lookout for it.
Yeah, I always wanted to have it set. And in fact, it was one of those things where the minute I got the job, it was like the first thing I thought we should do. In a way, I almost wanted to, I say this with love, I almost wanted to get it over with, because there's so many other texts that I want to dig into. It's like, let's start with the one that is the most known, the one that is the most relevant to the story, actually, of the Rings of Power. So I thought, well, this is a bullseye for season 1. Let's use it, and then, you know, kind of dig deeper into the text for later seasons, perhaps. I wanted to ask you a question as a fan. You know, did you like or dislike the fact that the Fiona Apple vocal version was released later? Would you have preferred it to come out when the whole record came out?
Yes, that was like when that announcement came 1 week in advance. I thought it was a mistake. Like, they can't really put this here before like the actual, you know, diegetic or whatever you would call it reveal of that song. Even though I of course expected that to be one eventually, but it did feel weird.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that and I was involved in that decision too. It's not all marketing, but in a way, maybe we all miscalculated in that I thought the Fiona Apple track was so cool, and Fiona Apple is so cool that it's like it's just going to be like, let's save this final thing for the end and drop it later. What was interesting is that I honestly miscalculated how much people would love the score.
Yeah,
and that the you know, with Howard's title and with the score and with like This Wandering Day and Plea to the Rocks, that actually they're generated so much goodwill and streams. People were listening, and that actually I felt in a way that the Fiona Apple track, the ring verse, it was like too late. It missed it was like the train had left the station, and so like hindsight being 2020, I would have advocated to put it out at the same time. You know what I mean? But because I agree, I kind of felt the same way that by the time it came out, it was like people were so buzzed about everything else that it didn't really change the conversation. If anything, I thought it was like people struggled to find that track because they'd already listened to the record for months, you know?
Exactly. And now, never underestimate the level to which Lord of the Rings fans want to consume all of the stuff about Lord of the Rings.
I was just gonna say the positive spin on it coming out later is just that I do have confidence that, like, you know, this is a body of work that's just going to grow, and as more fans, you know, in season 2 and later come back and listen to season 1, it's there now. You know, the Ringverse poem is there, and I think its placement in the show is really cool. So yeah, I'm excited about it. But in a way, it created further, I think, enigma around that melody, around the, you know, and so in a way that was maybe one of the other, you know, positive sides of it, is that track got to be a little mysterious for a while, which was cool.
So I guess we'll get straight into the meat of the mystery, so to say, because I watched, of course, your interview with in Deep Geek, or Robert, I think he's called, and it's where the first one where you hinted at some kind of stuff happening below the surface, and then your follow-up, of course, when you talked about the relationship between Sauron's theme and Halbrand's theme. But I honestly think at that still just going just below the surface, there's so much more, because like not only is Halbrand's theme and Sauron's theme very similar, but it's also where they're placed in the show. Like honestly, months before the show aired, people were already dead certain that Halbrand was Sauron, just so you know. Okay. And the moment we watched like episode 2 and we heard the Southlands theme for him, like that had clearly been established as like a Southlands theme in the first episode, we were starting to doubt that, no idea. And hearing like black speech when we see the stranger, same thing there. Is it really Halbrand that is Sauron? Like your music does a lot of the heavy lifting in making sure that that deception keeps going.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I mean, that was always a balance between my score does two things. It is a guide along the big picture. I'm thinking about where this is going to pay off, 50 hours of story from now, the last alliance of elves and men, what's going to happen to the ring. I'm thinking about all these things. But I also, the other thing I must do is serve in the moment. This second of footage, you need to feel a certain way. And if I ever sacrifice the quality of that for the big picture, I have failed. So there are places where in particular, like with the stranger, I wanted to create a sense that we did not know where he's from. I mean, it's why I featured this Balinese gamelan ensemble on his ostinato, because it's like completely outside of all the other factions and realms that I'd written music for. It doesn't belong to any of them. So it adds this mystery and confusion about who he is. With Halbrand, I really wanted to lean into his story of he's sort of an expat from the Southlands. He has left his homeland, and he's fated to return, which is true.
Yeah,
it's the spin and it's the truth. I mean, if you think about it, it's like you're hearing the Southlands theme when you are seeing Halbrand. You're also hearing the Mordor theme when you see Sauron.
Yeah,
they are the same.
Yeah.
So that gave me a lot of cover. It really was color and intent were these two things that I because like to boil it down, there's three ways that I differentiate my themes in the Rings of Power, and it's melody or contour, color, the sound, the instrument, and intent, meaning the emotional context of that theme. and Sauron's theme, Sauron and Halbrand have two of these that are in polar opposites. The intent, obvious. I mean, that's the emotional vibe of the Sauron theme, even when it's not purely evil, is dark and malicious and twisted. And the emotional intent of Halbrand.
I had one idea about that when you talked with Deep Geek, when you talked about like those same notes repeating over and over and forming rings. It's quite interesting how you managed to make like the Southlands theme feel organic, like something that somebody in the Southlands might have come up with, like no, 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 no.
You can easily imagine a nickel harpa player just sitting on the porch. Yeah.
While Sauron's theme feels inorganic, bam, 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 like it's sterile almost. Like it's like sticks, like it's inhuman in that way.
Absolutely. So the narrative intent and the color are opposite, but the contour, the melody is closely related. I mean, they're identical, except one is the backwards version of the other, and one is the upside down version of the other. So they are both retrograde and inversion, which almost means like any axis that you view it from, they're a reflection of the other. Just looking at the notes you hear the most, da 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 da, da 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 da. And you know, how obvious that is, your mileage may vary. You know, I think that for most people, color and narrative intent is 99% of what they absorb in music. I think that like the intricacies of the melody are something that you hear and I hear, but your brain also absorbs. And this is what I thought was cool, is that, and I know I mentioned this on Deep Geek, but all my hero themes have big intervals, all of them, and they all have one superstar interval. Everybody's theme starts off with one interval in a specific direction. There's a few overlaps, but the more important the character, the more significant and unique the theme is. Yeah. And Halbrand, of all our heroes, he doesn't. His theme is the most contained because Sauron's theme, when I write an antagonist theme, I keep them small and clustery and dissonant, you know. So that to me was a big giveaway, that everyone else we meet and they have these big fifths, sixths, sevenths, major sevenths, and then, you know, na 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 na, here's this guy who's very shifty. So I really used harmony and color to like try to make you ignore that.
Which is still interesting because you managed to put those high leaps in like the B phrase, which I think we only hear once in season 1 when he has that chat with Galadriel opening up.
You hear it. Da, 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 da. You hear it also in the end of 7 when he's getting on the horse and Arondir walks up and they're sort of saying their farewells. It's in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there by design to actually offset the. I felt like if I lived too much in you might have heard it in episode 4 as well. If I lived too much in the na 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 na, if it was too small the whole time, I think people would I truly believe that people would go, "What's up with this guy? Why does Galadriel have da 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 and he's down here?" So yeah, I did you know, with the B themes, try to, especially with Halbrand's, kind of give you what you would expect if he really was a Strider type character, which is the archetype that we were sort of leaning on.
Like, it's once again a moment where it's not technically a lie. Like, I think he is genuine in that.
I will tell you that I believe that. And the reason that I believe that, or the evidence that I believe that, is in the reharmonization of Sauron's theme. You hear it in the album track, but it's really clear in the broken line cue at the end of episode 8, when he is basically saying, you know, in dialogue, he's saying, I just want to make things better. And like, Morgoth was really mean to me and I'm free of him. And hey, join me. And like, it's going to be great. I believe him. And his harmony there under the da 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 da. I am bending over backwards to give you major chords. They're just jumping all over the place, and it's very oddly uplifting. It is genuine. I am, even though the melody is by design very duplicitous and sinister, there is a way to harmonize it that it's like, no, it's beautiful. Which I thought was great. You know, I mean, I love that about the character, and I love that about our show, that we're going to have time to do that. And that is something that I had to be aware of in where, like, you know, for better or worse, I mean, you know, in Howard Shore's scores, there was very little of that kind of crossing of the moral line. You know, you had a character that was good, you had characters that were bad, and obviously there was some, but you know, like the Sauron theme in the movies never needed to like go in that direction, and mine kind of had to have that capacity.
Okay, I'm really gonna try to stop my Howard Shore brain, because I have some opinions about what you just said there, but I'm not.
Well, I want to hear.
Like the Sauron themes that Howard Shore made are, of course, there are several of them. Like the History of Ring theme that I'm just gonna actually get this moment to try use my musician mode and see. Can you hear this? You hear that?
Yeah.
But he also got like the Seduction of Ring theme. Which of course is beautiful, you know, and he Howard Shore managed to play around with those kind of timbres, like the Innocent Boys Choir, and like things even until the last movie. Oh, I wish I could remember the name of the cue, but he managed to do some very interesting mixes of all those different themes, so you can get both the threatening and like the seductive, like the interesting. Which of course still, you know, it's still not a question about is it good or bad.
You know, as a viewer, I always associated those themes with the Ring. And that like the idea that Sauron and the Ring would come together was always like, to me, the idea that like there'd be some, if that ever were to happen in the movies, that there'd be some like his theme was like split up. Do you know what I mean? They all, like, it always felt, none of those felt to me that it was like, oh, that's definitely Sauron on his own. You know, that it was like he's trying to connect with the Ring because part of him is in it. And so, but it's just how I felt about it, you know?
Have you read this book, The Music of the Lord of the Rings films by Doug Adams?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, of course. Then, you know, we're on the same wavelength about all the different themes and the interactions. That's basically what my entire channel has been about, just like trying to make that into an audiovisual like shape. Which still I'm going to make sure that nobody believes that means they shouldn't buy this book. Like everybody who's watching this, buy this book, no matter if you can get a very similar kind of content for free from me. It would make me very sad if people decided not to support the Doug Adams book, because that's like the golden standard of music score journalism for me. And your blogs do a very similar thing, by the way. You certainly have an interest in like pedagogy, like trying to lift the lid on the industry and the process and how you work along with like the show writers of the different projects you're working with. Is there like a music teacher in you somewhere?
I'm sure there is. I mean, for me, I started blogging before social media. I just started doing it because I'm so nerdy about this. And in the early days of my career on a show called Battlestar Galactica, I was posting blog entries every week that an episode aired, and I just left the comments on and just interacted with fans and answered all their questions. And what was interesting about that is that it was television, not like this. It was more a more traditional model in that we would be airing episode 303, but I'm scoring episode 305 or 6. And fans would say, they would ask me questions. Oh, what is that Starbucks theme? You know, I think I heard Starbucks theme in this context. And sometimes they'd be wrong, but I'd go, well, that's a cool idea. I'm going to put that in. I'll do that in episode 306, you know? It was a very personal, close reaction, back and forth. I mean, that's, that's what I think. I love Doug Adams' book, but my blog, I always think of it as more personal. It's like I'm being very. It's not just like an analysis of the product. Anybody can do that. I always try to also offer some insight into like what I was going through when I wrote it. Often, my struggles that I go through, what that the emotional part of it, because I think if I don't write that down, when I die, that dies with me. Whereas an analysis of the themes, like, I mean, I love that people do that, but it's also like that exists in the work, So for me, a project was never done until I'd written a blog entry about it and like put it out there. But also I got that from my mentor was a film composer named Elmer Bernstein. And Elmer took an interest in me, and I was his last protege, and I worked with him for almost a decade. And he, maybe more than any other film composer in history, was a huge advocate for teaching the art of film music, for teaching young people about film music, and for sharing his knowledge. And I owe him one, man. So like I definitely felt like the universe connected me with him, so I gotta pay it forward and do everything I can to help somebody else out there that might get into film music. From listening to
it's great.
The way
now you and probably Austin Wintory are the people I immediately spring to mind. People who are passionate about trying to close that distance between like the average movie or the TV or video game enjoyer to like actually understanding what happens below the surface. And I should also mention, if I get one chance to actually influence this, it would be worth the entire chat trying to get you. Please talk with Austin again. I love your chats, all those previous interviews. You have such a good chemistry.
Thank you. I actually speak with Austin often, usually just on the phone, and we end up chatting for like an hour and a half every once in a while. And then at the end of it, we're like, we should do a podcast. Like what people would,
of course, monetize this.
About stuff. I'll duly noted. I mean, I love Austin, and he's a friend of mine, and I think he's definitely a kindred spirit. And of course, I love his music, and so I'm glad to know that you are aware of his work too.
I mean, honestly, the fact that you are willing to give away these blogs for free, I mean, like that, you could totally be writing like the music of a lot of Rings of Power films if you wanted to.
And there might be I can easily imagine doing that when the show is done. I mean, I will have done all the blog entries, but I want people to know all these things about the score, and I want to share with everybody. And for me, it's a personal. It's very personal, Like I want people, for the few people that want to know what it was really like doing all the stuff that I've done. I like knowing that all that stuff's out there. So yeah, I mean, it's not a matter of giving it away for free. To me, the value is in people like you reading it. It's not a financial value. Do you know what I mean? Like that. When I was growing up and like listening to Jerry Goldsmith, like, dude, if he had a blog and I could have gone to see The Shadow and then gone home and like read about what he did, like that would have changed my life. So if there's not to compare myself to Jerry Goldsmith, but if there's anybody out there that like gets that kind of thrill out of it, I feel like I'm doing a good thing in the universe,
Yeah. And also I could say that the interesting thing about reading your blogs is noticing that many of the, like, you have gotten the question so many times, oh, how does it feel to like work in the shadow of Howard Shore, or like trying to make something similar? But that's like, this is not something new for you. You have been working with established musical material from Battlestar Galactica, Godzilla, Masters of the Universe. Like, you have had to have that debate with yourself. Am I supposed to like reinterpret some of old themes or create something new over and over? I could frankly believe it would be easier now than when they actually told you don't get to use it, and then you have to decide it yourself.
It certainly was easier in that that was one of the biggest decisions looming over us that was made before I was even hired. So it's like, okay, well, that's the path. How do I now move forward on this path? It's not my first rodeo with IP, and I've had every possible permutation of, you know, completely being unable to touch original IP's music, to being able to use all of it, to, you know, somewhere in between where it, like Rings of Power, where it's like you can't use it, but Howard's going to write the main title. So,
Yeah.
which in a way was almost like the perfect balance, because knowing that he was going to write the main title, there was a sense that like it further freed me from having to worry about impersonating him, which I never wanted to do. And I'm honestly not, that's not my skill set. I wouldn't be able to write in his style. Knowing that, all right, we're gonna open each episode with a big blast of Howard Shore. It's gonna sound awesome. It's gonna sound like the movies. Then you're coming over to my world, which I think is respectful, you know. But it made it, in a way, it was very liberating. It was all very liberating. But yeah, it was exciting, and that's, in a way, that's the fun of getting to work on these kind of IPs that are known, is you get to play around with what fans expect. I mean, oddly, maybe the biggest challenge was God of War Ragnarok, where on God of War 2018 they said, hey, you don't have to quote any of the old themes from the old games.
Like, even if there were scenes that called for it, like when he finds his swords, you could have put one da 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 right there.
We could have, and we did. And you know what? I did it. I drafted it. I wrote it, and I was like, "What do you guys think?" And we all looked at it and we thought, you know, it's not the same level of emotional effectiveness. So just because at this point in the story you were so invested in the Kratos theme and the theme for Faye, his deceased wife, and the theme for the giants, you know, you're 30 hours in, that, yeah, anyway, it became clear that it was just not going to function in God of War 2018. Okay, but then go to God of War Ragnarok. Suddenly, I'm in the shadow of my own work.
Yeah.
Now, the expectation, they're like, well, how could you have to quote this and quote that? It was my own music. And in fact, I had a number of dramatic conflicts with Sony Santa Monica Studio, because some people wanted to keep it very conservative, don't change anything for any of the old themes, and other people wanted to kind of like reinvent the wheel, and I was right in the middle. You know, ultimately the way I was advocating to do it is what happened, and everybody realized the value in it, that it's like we need to reference the old themes a little, but we also need to change them, because these are, Kratos and Atreus are so different after the events of the first game. You can't just come in and play their themes again.
I mean, like, instead, like, the entire point of if a leitmotif, it doesn't necessarily have to be a leitmotif, but if a leitmotif is supposed to tell a story, then it kind of has to change, because no story stays the same.
Yeah, and I implement this all the time. I implement it across Rings of Power. It's even the first season, in a way that, you know, is inspired by the orchestral masters that I grew up listening to: John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, Basil Polidorus, Alan Silvestri, Danny Elfman, Nino Rota, Ennio Morricone. You know, but with that said, I definitely feel like I take that kind of motivic writing to an extreme. And I think maybe it might even be the television format that has allowed me to do that, where in one sitting I'm tackling 8 hours of narrative, compared to Star Wars, for example. Obviously, my music is not as good as John Williams.
I see your point.
But you know, in Star Wars, Darth Vader didn't even have a theme.
No.
Then he came up with a great one in the second movie. And then in the third one, at the end, the little harp solo when Anakin passes away, and you're like, oh, that's awesome. But because it was divided up in the way that it was like written, it's like if he had done if the trilogy existed and they said John Williams score it all, I bet the Imperial March would have shown up in A New Hope. I'm just saying, I bet it would have, because it would have paid off even bigger at the end. And of course, there's going to be changes from season 2 to 3, and there's going to be stuff I can't predict. But having 8 hours of story does give me, I'm able to plan out in advance, like a theme like Halbrand and Sauron's. Like I'm putting a lot of thought into like where am I obvious? Where am I mysterious? Where do I use the nickel harpa? Where do I use the black speech? I do feel like I have more opportunity to get really granular. And if anything, the theme evolution is always like these tiny little shifts where it's like a dial that's turning over the course of 8 episodes. And then I'm still thinking about where is it going to turn over 50 episodes.
Sure. It is certainly something interesting about having like 5 seasons like decided in advance, because the vast majority of TV, of course, has to combat. They have to fight their way to keep going on every season. So they kind of like always have to deliver to a certain point. It's a very unique situation.
It's incredibly unique. I mean, to have relative confidence that we're going to tell this big story and to have the source material that we all love so that we know with some specificity what is going to happen, that is also a rare occurrence. Again, I've been in the business long enough. I've seen every possible permutation. I've seen a show where the showrunners very confidently have a 5-season arc. Every showrunner says they have a 5-season arc, and then you get canceled halfway through season 1. Or on Battlestar Galactica, we ran 4 seasons. Ron Moore had a general sense, but he was a very improvisatory writer in that he would love to write a cliffhanger at the end of the season that would challenge him and his writers in the next season. But he did not know exactly what was going to happen. Even if I was when I was scoring the first episode, if I had said to Ron, well, how is this going to play out in 4 seasons? He just would have laughed in my face, like 4 seasons. We're gonna, and in that, and I did have to kind of evolve my themes as I went along. Starbuck is an example of a character who was like the Han Solo, and she had like an emotional, heroic theme, and then she started making some really like dark decisions in the first season, and then in the 3rd season, she took on an almost otherworldly, divine kind of character arc, and I just had to write her a new theme, a second theme. There was a theme for her otherworldly angelic side and the theme for her like earthy, grounded, kick-ass hero side. But again, had I known that in season 1, it is possible I might have figured out a way to get that in one idea, but
yeah,
so I'm excited about this.
If it just had been any other composer who was going to do this, and who had made, if not like the exact same score, but like a very similar score, I think that I could have like become like the guy who knew about this score. I could have been like made videos like the one I already did, and I kept doing that. But since it's you, of course, you're going to make your blogs, and it's going to be like everybody's going to know about it. My position would be a bit more redundant just because of this. I'm surely gonna keep making stuff about this if it keeps being as good as it is right now. I can tell you that.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, and I've definitely enjoyed watching your analyses and your Twitter posts, and if anything, it's like some of the things you've said. It's been nice to know that you're picking up on that, and as I've been drafting my blogs, I've actually written them all. There were certain things that it's like, oh, I should go back after reading one of your tweets. I'm like, I should go back and add a little detail, because I really address that. So in a way, it like, because there's so much to say that in a way it's helpful to see what's translating to you and other fans, so that I know that at the very least, even as I'm throwing all this other detail in there, that I'm addressing kind of like the core things that you guys are picking up on.
In that spirit, I think we really should make a sort of lightning round, because once again, I had so many things prepared, and like, I'm not going to try to make this like an interrogation. Tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. Of course, that's not the point of this. But I think there are some, like, I think I would at least be very disappointed if I didn't get the chance to talk about. So
let's do it.
Yeah, one of them is the translations, because in Deep Geek asked you about this, but I'm not really sure if I understood your answer, because the process of translating all the lyrics that you were needed, you mentioned somebody called Griff Jones. Are you trying to say that he made the translations, or that he was the guy who made sure that your intent got to the person made?
No. He is like he's like a switchboard operator. He's like the lore he knows so much about the lore. He's the one that you go to say, I need a translation of this into Dwarvish. He'd be like, you need to talk to this person. Or
Okay, so
I need a Dwarvish word. I need a Black speech word for this. You need to talk to this person. And ultimately, translation occurred a few times. There were a few times that there was a text that we really wanted to say, or a text that J.D. Payne was usually the one writing. There'd be a written text, or there's a text from the source material, which may or may not be in one of the Tolkien languages. More often than not, it was actually the other way around. We weren't translating text. We were building meaning from the words that exist. And this was a decision that I made, because Griff made clear to me, anything you want to say in any language, we have people that can build that. They need that for dialogue in the show. So that service is set up. But he said, in particular with Black speech and Khuzdul, there's very limited words that existed originally. And I said to him, I would rather see those words and build my messaging around that than say something and have it translated, creating, language in the style of. So what that means is that most of the text is imagery and simple constructed ideas. But 99% of it is words that Tolkien himself created.
Yeah.
So in that, and like, for Black speech, it's almost entirely from the Ring poem, which is fine because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. With the notorious, with the exception of Nampat, of course, which was a huge debate actually about what is Nampat supposed to mean, and it appears both in Sauron's theme and in the Nampat song, of course, like the other song. So like there was some special consideration for that theme that in the end still wasn't actually put into translation in the actual show, which surprised me. I expected that to be some sort of reveal at some point, like, oh shit, Nampat means, what is it, death? Is that like the official take now?
Yeah. In the context of the Rings of Power, that's what Adar's army are chanting as they head up to the Watchtower. And it in particular, the Khuzdul is a fascinating language. It sounds very specific, but also there are so few words. I really wanted to be more authentic and say less lyrically. That was essentially my guiding light. And knowing that at any point, if it's really important to say a very specific thing, that Griff would pair us up with the person that would help us to do that. Leith McPherson was really the person we worked most closely with.
The dialect.
Yes, because we had all the words. We had essentially a Bible, a dictionary, really, of all the words, and placed them into the text. And then in order for the choirs and the solo singers to perform them, someone needed to pronounce them in the order that they existed. So Leith created, hours and hours and hours of recording just for us to be able to do that.
But so there wasn't like one specific person like tasked with doing translations for a show. Like there was several, or
there are effectively no translations in my score.
But like there were some people doing the translations in the show, though.
And that is I cannot speak to them.
You didn't have any connection with them.
Exactly. Like, so whether it's one person or it's 40 people, I do not know, because ultimately I opted to stay. I did not want anything translated. I stayed within the words that existed, because Griff sent us basically all the words that exist for all these languages, less so the Elven ones, there's more obviously, but I looked at them and I thought, this is for season 1, this is going to work. I don't need more Black speech.
Good. The trailers, you have mentioned in the blog posts, for the existing blog post, that you did the score for like the first trailer, the one which features the stranger theme, which I also guess is an example of you using that slight deception, because it's very like ring creating kind of imagery there, and you hear that melody. So like the associations that there's something curious and mysterious about it, perhaps planted already in that first trailer.
I definitely was thinking about what theme do I want to lead with. I knew I had an opportunity to plant one in your ear. Yes, there was part of that, like, ooh, the deception. But honestly, the truth is, the Strangers theme has this mood that evokes Howard Shore's scores in a way that I thought, I want to make sure that people understand, whether they understand that they understand it, that the music in this show is coming from a place of recognizing what Peter Jackson's films accomplished and building upon it. You know what I mean? So it was sort of like, it would be awesome to hear the Numenor theme there. I love it. Or to hear Khazad-dûm. That's dope. But it would send a weird message about what the show is. But the Strangers theme does encapsulate a harmonic and melodic vibe. You know, that so that was really, more than anything else, was just the one that it's like, if I had to pick one to lead with, that was the one. And then I'm blanking on the guys. I think they're guys, Felix and Lucas were the guys that did the trailer, the big trailer that came out. And I wasn't involved in any of the other trailers other than contributing. They used my themes, but I didn't do
that
anything.
was exactly what I was actually trying to lead this question to, because like we have distinct takes on the Sauron and Galadriel, and especially the Wandering Day and the kind of minor moded almost take on it. You weren't involved actually with making that sort of thing.
No, I know those guys. They're great guys, and I sent them some of my themes early. I was like, hey, you know, here's the Galadriel theme if you need it. Here, you know, I gave them some building blocks. Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised that some of those translated in there. Nori's theme is in there.
Really?
And
you see me appear in one of the trailers.
In the very beginning, it's in there.
I gotta go check that out. Do you think there's going to be another kind of release of those takes of the music at some point as well? Like, especially that Wandering Day is very cool. I
have no idea. Maybe. I mean, I would love, of this unreleased material, the suite that I wrote for San Diego Comic-Con is the thing I would love to put out, which was this really cool 5-minute overture that was pretty awesome. And I might throw it onto the recording sessions when we start up season 2 again, because it's like, it was a fun little like blast of all these different themes.
Perhaps fun to do for future seasons too, with the new themes. Similar questions. Have you any intention of publish scores at some point?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, Amazon controls all these rights, but I'm talking with them about the possibility of concert performances, of concert suites, of you know, and then sort of like, then also down the tier on that path would be like, you know, study scores, like the complete scores for musicians that would want to see them. All these things are on the docket, and I would imagine that a variety of these things will come to pass. It's really just a matter of timing. But that's what's great about having this long run of material, is that some of these ideas, you know, benefit from happening now, and others benefit from maybe happening closer to the end or at the end, when you can say, here's the complete recordings, the complete scores, you know, all that kind of stuff.
See. And the idea is to keep releasing the scores the way we are doing it for the first season, with one for the entire season and then new ones per episode.
We haven't discussed a release plan for season 2, but I feel that the release of the, you know, the main soundtrack album followed by the episodics was pretty effective. What did you think?
Yeah, of course. Like the only thing I might have any right word would be that like the name for the classic case of the name of titles in score possibly
Spoiler?
spoiling stuff. I think it was pretty okay with the first one, but like this might even be a weird opinion, but the fact that Halbrand's theme, or like the Halbrand / Southlands theme, was called Halbrand's theme, that simple thing like affected how we watched the show, because it's the entire first episode is only used for the Southlands, but we still think, oh, that's Halbrand's theme. So like little things like that kind of thing.
That's a good point. I actually, it's funny because my only regret with the naming, I just thought Nampot. Oh, that's so metal. I love it. I love it. But then everyone was asking, what's Adar's theme? What's Adar's theme? And I was like, oh no, I shortchanged this great character. Like, that is his theme.
Yeah.
It's da 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 da. It's in there, and it's like a big fanfare. It's so in a way, like, I thought about calling it the Southlands, and on the extended record, there's this track called The Southlands that has all that stuff for 101. But I think I was definitely thinking, Halbrand is such a main character. It would be weird if he didn't have. It would almost be like devil's advocate here. If there wasn't a track called Halbrand, fans might have even further been like, oh, there's something up with him. How come he doesn't have a theme?
Good point.
So I don't know, pick your poison. But yeah, I maybe should have called Nampot should have been called Adar, but there you go.
Regarding names of titles, like the Mystics, like stuck out a bit from the other like main themes, so to say, because it didn't have one solo track dedicated to it. That's not really my point, though. The name, the Mystics, I think that's the only place in like the whole show where we get like a name for all three of them. Is that a word you came up with, or did someone say that they are the Mystics?
That is what the showrunners called them.
Okay.
I didn't make it up. Interestingly, though, we all speak in code. Okay. When even on the phone with one of them, nobody says anybody's real name. I have code names burned into my brain. And I always thought like, oh, the Mystics, like that's one of the code names. And then when it was time to do the record, I ran it by the showrunner. I was like, oh, what are we calling this? Is it the Mystics? What are they called? And they were like, we can just call them the Mystics. Yeah, I know that never became textualized in the show, though I know in other interviews, JD and Patrick would refer to them as that. I suppose I could have called them, it was like the Dweller, the something, and the something. I'm blanking now. They did have a name, but even those names weren't textualized either. So in a way, the Mystics was a cool, tight title to call it.
Sure. Let's see. We've been talking a bit about B themes, and
I'm curious. Are you aware of all the B themes that did not end up in season 1?
I think I have a pretty good take, because like the easiest one of the ones that actually appeared in season 1 would be like Khazad-dûm, because like baked into like the A theme, so it appears more than once. I think it's both the first time we hear it.
The Khazad-dûm B theme appearing in the moment when King Durin says to his son, "There's nothing to forgive." That to me is one of the most emotional moments in the entire show. Da 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 da. I only use it once, but oh my god, it was great. It was great.
Yes. And like we got, of course, I think I actually wrote down every one of them that I heard, but of course I don't have that here right now. But like, obviously,
I'm interrogating you, Anton. Answer.
Yeah, of course. Oh shit, here it comes.
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, I've been very curious about how you like develop the themes and ostinatos as two separate things. We were supposed to make like a lightning round that's completely falling off.
Well, I can answer quickly in that, like, I love them both. I love ostinatos. I love melodies. Ostinatos are so much more subtle in their ability to be placed under dialogue in a scene. Like, melodies are a big statement. And on a technical level, they draw your attention away from dialogue more. than an ostinato, which is more digestible and short. So I wanted to make sure that there existed ostinatos and melodies, but also it's just a personal taste thing. I love them both.
Man, like if you compare with Howard Shore's work, like he has got like several different pages of just accompaniment. So like that, it's not something unheard of for the Lord of the Rings universe, so to say, to have more subtle components, so to say. And it's also quite interesting. I noticed, I don't think we actually ever hear the Galadriel ostinato so featured so heavily in that suite ever in the actual show, because it's almost always the Sauron ostinato.
I was going to say, or you hear it connected to the Sauron ostinato, where it's like like you hear it with that metered trem that feels very Sauron-y. And when you hear it in that context, it feels very Sauron. You also don't hear the Galadriel B theme.
No, of course.
In the show.
And Elrond's B theme.
And there's the end of Elrond's theme you don't hear, which is my favorite part of it.
I noticed you mentioned that in another interview. And the same with Elendil. We hear Arondir and Bronwyn's.
Let's get that one. The Elendil and Isildur one might be my favorite of the B themes. I just think it's a really evocative, like very James Hornery kind of melody. We'll hear it. You know, it's coming. And some of these I withheld on purpose, and others there just wasn't the right moment to use it yet.
Yeah, of course. And it's great to know that there are more ideas yet to explore. That even within the context of this show, ideas have formed that will have fruition later.
Well, and it's like I talked about, you know, the evolution of all these characters over the first season, but I am, as you know, I'm not a subtle writer. I like you to know when I'm using a theme, and that like the Galadriel B theme, I'm holding that card close to the chest. I'm going to use it. But despite the number of times that I quoted the Galadriel theme in the first season, I would rather err on the side of caution, making sure that it's her A theme, that you really connect it with her. And also because like her arc is just part of her bigger journey over the course of the series. Like we're going to get more variations of her theme. That B theme's going to enter is going to enter the soundscape and add more dimensions to her as she becomes more and more like the Galadriel that we saw in the movies.
I mean, it's not impossible that you've yet to find like the reason to use them. Like I'm not sure if I could put that right, but I don't think that any character from the books like are gonna suddenly appear turn evil if they didn't do it in the books, like for example. So there's no huge surprises coming on that horizon, but there could be some interesting moments that you even haven't read about yet that will call for, oh, suddenly there it is. That's the moment when you use like Elrond's B theme, for example.
And you know, in a way, you've just described my entire creative process, which is like I create all this work and I think this might go here, this might go here, but at the end of the day, I sit in this room and I watch a scene, and it's like the scene tells me what it wants. I just feel like, oh, I am channeling this story, and it, whether or not I wanted to use the Galadriel B theme, there was no scene that told me that's what it needed yet.
I think that's a very sane way to approach it, so it doesn't become just like a list that you have to check off, like, okay, so I need to this.
Exactly. And I want to emphasize again, like all this preparation, all this forethought, planning, theme writing, ostinatos, melodies, it's all useful to have. But at the end of the day, my job first and foremost is to have an emotional response to the footage that inspires me to write music that guides your emotional response to every individual scene. Like the last thing in the world I would ever want is the average viewer to be watching a scene and go, oh, that's like an inversion of the theme from the other character. Like I have failed. Do you know what I mean? So you're the exception, my friend.
Yeah, I know that. Let's see here. You mentioned, I thought it was very funny in your video with Kevin Smith when you were working on the Masters of the Universe Revelations, about you managed to reveal a bit about your process. The fact that sometimes just singing some words or some names was everything you needed to get inspiration. Has there been a case like that with the Rings of Power?
Not explicitly, but I'm always thinking about vocal melodies, even though I started off our interview talking about how different they are than instrumental melodies, but they start from a place of like any melody that can be sung emotionally is going to translate to French horns and strings and these sort of lyrical instruments. So I definitely found myself in the theme generation process doing a lot of background processing. I would write stuff, and then my part of my process is I write sketches, I print them a mix, and I throw them onto my phone. And then like while I'm doing the dishes or driving someplace, or sometimes even like late at night, I'll just put them on and be like, and listen, not in here, but just listen in the way that you listen, and
trying to become like the audience man.
Exactly. I'm trying to recreate that experience. What part of that melody works? And then and in that environment, very often it's like, oh, there's that melody doesn't work, and so, yeah, having things that are, and then eventually when they start getting stuck in my head, I'm doing the dishes and I'm sitting here, oh, that's cool. That's Galadriel's theme, and oddly, like I gotta say, just in terms of lyrical construction, melodic construction with lyrical melodies, the Galadriel, people liking the Galadriel theme was a shock to me. I struggled with her, and she was one of the last themes I wrote. And there was that Twitter poll thing, right?
Right. They Rings of
Power.
Power.
Right, so wow, I was watching that, like, wow, and I thought, like, honestly, I thought it was like Khazad-dûm or Numenor are gonna just
fan favorites.
But Galadriel, interestingly, at the end of the day, what I finally did with Galadriel is like I got lost in my head about all the stuff that fans are talking about. Oh, she's an elf, but she's an outlier, and it's like, oh, but in this version she's a warrior, but she's gonna become this, ethereal figure later. And I was just tied up in knots. And then finally I was like, the most important thing for me is that you feel an emotional connection to her. She needs, more than anything else, a great melody. And in a way, I was like, I'm going to have to divorce myself from this, like, but part of it is elvish and part of it is blah, blah, blah. It was just like all that stuff sometimes helps me, but at a certain point, it's like, it was hurting me. And I wrote this tune that in a way was sort of like, well, I'll try this, just something that is coming from a very purely emotional and personal place. And after I wrote it, I was like, that's not one of the best themes. I thought Nori's theme was like way more memorable. And maybe I don't think that anymore, but only having watched the show, and it was just interesting to me that really resonated with people. I found, and the show has something to do with that. It's not just musical traits; it's the way it's presented in the narrative.
I mean, like I think one of my favorite themes is, of course, The Stranger, and like that major seventh is really hard to get right.
Oh man, I'm so proud of that one. I remember when I was in music school in ear training class, they were training you to sing all the intervals up to an octave. And this was for all music students, not just composers. So it was pretty broad. And there were all these like film score and pop song ways to remember these intervals. Jaws. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, there's a minor second. They couldn't come up with one for the major seventh. They couldn't come up with one that everybody knew, that kids could sing. So what they did is they go, do Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Somewhere, oh, somewhere,
Isn't it embarrassing that was the example I was thinking in my mind, like Somewhere in Raven is almost like that.
No, yeah. It's not embarrassing at all. But there's a cheat note. You go up an octave and then hook. And I was like, one day I want to write a theme that is a major seven, da 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 da, and just like a fanfare, and see if I can make it work. And I'm proud of it. I think it's good. And it's unmistakable, right? I mean, when you hear the 2 notes of that one, you know which theme it is.
So time to settle a new horizon. Try to write a prime to flat 9th now.
The flat 9, that's the next one, man.
I'm not sure, was it John Williams or there's some like very established film music composer was talking about that a really good theme should be recognizable just from the first 2 notes. I'm not sure if it was him, but of course he's a good example of it. He's somebody who's made several like very recognizable themes with that method. And yet, I think very intriguing, not gonna like spoil something for the future, but the fact that Numenor and Sauron start on the same interval is a very interesting choice.
Yeah, and that one is one where one of those other traits I was talking about, context and narrative intent, are in the beginning very different. But it's interesting, right? Like when Pharazôn is talking with his son in episode 5, I think. Yeah, maybe it's 4. Forgive me. But anyway, it's the first time that he drops the mask, and his son's like, "How come you're agreeing with this?" It would have been in 5, you know, and he basically shows that he has machinations for how this will benefit Numenor, and then you hear the Numenor theme, da 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 da. And I said it in minor. Yeah, it's da 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 da. Until you get that iconic octave leap, it feels very Sauron-esque. You know, so that it's not an accident that like buried within this incredible anthem is one of those tight themes that are small. Yes, it ends with the biggest leap in the entire score. Da 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 da. I mean, that's so heroic. It's awesome. But the beginning of it is, I think it was sort of by design, knowing that I wanted that theme to function both as the anthem for the place, but also for the conflicts that are going to start to evolve.
I mean, that was like one of the first kind of analysis I tried to make when all we had heard of the Numenor theme was like one of those Twitter spots or something, like 1 minute of like, here's Numenor. And we didn't hear them in the right order. Like we heard first like a part of, I don't know if it would count as the B theme or C theme, that and I thought that was the like the and I thought that was the A theme. It's like, okay, cool, there's an A theme, and here we got a no. That felt more evil in comparison, and I was like, ooh, so perhaps it's like the Faithful and the Kingsman. So there's like a grain of interesting ways that
what's interesting, right, is you have a descending minor third, a descending minor third, which on paper is like, well, obviously that's evil, and in Sauron's da 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 da, it's like bullseye. But the same notes, da 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 ba da 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 da. That's where the context sort of shifts.
I mean, it's over a major chord, right? It's like E to G over C, for example. You don't notice it as the same kind of info.
Yeah, and in a way, like I, truthfully, probably did not design those to start with a minor third. In my head, the superstar of the Numenor theme interval is the octave down. It's just not at the beginning, because that octave down in big brass, I mean, you need incredible players, French horns, to jump from a high C where they're just piercing to go down to middle C and still be big. It's like, this is where I know I'm going to be recording in London. So for me, it's like, I want to really throw down and have this kind of cool, but yeah, in a way though, then it's like, by putting too much emphasis on the first interval, it does mean like, oh, it's the same as Sauron. It's like, no, that was never an intention.
And we have similar cases, like I think you heard about that Halbrand and Galadriel have a little bit of overlap too. Like, let's see if I can get part. Like, which
Yeah,
that little
yeah,
change like that. Like that's one of those things. Like the first time I heard that, like that can't possibly be intentional. That's just like
and it's
a trait of you as a composer. Like,
and beyond that, it's like yes, it's like these motivic up, down, down, back up. That little shape, that little you know, conch shell curve. Da 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 da. I mean, obviously, I'm in love with it. Da 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 da. You know, it's just like the same little twist over and over and over. And remember, the Halbrand theme had to be the Sauron theme backwards. So in a way, the fact that I ended up with that same little curve shape in Halbrand's theme was an unintentional byproduct, because I was mostly focusing on Halbrand and Sauron and their relationship. Now, with that said, if someone hears that, the irony is there are musical connections between Halbrand and Galadriel in their ostinatos. I've blurred them on purpose, so it's not a bad thing, nor is it a misleading narrative trait. So if somebody is watching and they think that, I can't take credit for deciding to do that, but you know what? It's a win. It's there.
yeah, and God knows I'm very familiar with having like my own theories about what is or isn't canon when it comes to scores like these. And you know, it's good to have like an open mind, like to realize that sure there can be like an intention that we can all accept that of course that's the intention, but that can be like the little fan can like, oh, but I see these relationships and you don't have to take them really seriously, but they exist at least. See, I had like a whole page just of comparisons between your music and your inspirations that I've noticed that every time you get the chance to speak about your idols, whatever we call them, you have a very specific list. Like it's always John Williams and Nino Rota and Ennio Morricone. I decided to check out several of those, like try to see if we could make a, that might be a bit ambitious, but do you have like a best of list or something? Like if you want people to understand Jerry's
yeah. I mean, like, first of all, Basil Polidorus, Conan the Barbarian, is
not Free Willy.
Not Free Willy, in my opinion, the greatest fantasy score of all time. You don't have to agree. I know you don't. It is the top spot for me. And it is, you know, one of a staggering achievement of film score. And I think that it's like definitely one to check out if you like Khazad-dûm. Jerry Goldsmith
in the Casa Doom theme. I mean, of course, like the melody line, of course, has very similar elements of like that.
Anvils, man. I mean, I'm not even. The anvils are from the Wheel of Pain cue. I mean,
yeah,
it's my vocal writing. My vocal writing evokes more Basil than Howard Shore, I think, most of the time, because that was in my brain just my entire life. Dun 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 bum 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 bum, and the trumpets. It's so great. But also just some of the evocative, beautiful passages. I can't say enough about it. Jerry Goldsmith in the 80s and 90s, it's almost like his entire output was so good, and the movies weren't good. But I mean, like, to me, Numenor is like it's like, you know, First Night, 13th Warrior, The Shadow. He was doing like Hans Zimmer before Hans Zimmer. I mean, he would write these massive brass fanfares that were just so.
Not to mention that, like, especially 13th Warrior, a parallel that I think was very interesting. We rarely hear like heroic Middle Eastern music in film scores.
Totally.
They're always threatening, always exotic, or like alien. Seeing your like very, very heavily inspired of heavily Middle Eastern inspiration in Numenor, and yet giving it that power, that pride, that is like majesty. Yes, exactly. And I thought like, holy shit, this is like a big deal. And then I went back and listened to 34. Oh yes, of course it has been done before. But...
yeah, exactly. It's all been done. It's just a chance to like regurgitate all these influences I love. Nino
Yeah.
Rota, I mean, any of the Fellini scores, La Strada, but it's, you know, The Godfather 1 and 2. I mean, just in terms of thematic elegance and clear sounds, the way that it's like the solo trumpet, the mandolin. I mean, these are and these just crushingly beautiful melodies. Choral writing at the end of The Godfather is beautiful. Alan Silvestri is a big one. I mean, just the way his kind of muscular writing in Back to the Future, Predator, stuff like that. Danny Elfman is a huge influence. I mean, especially his like late 80s, early 90s. I mean, like Batman Returns, Edward Scissorhands. Check out Nightbreed. The end credits of Nightbreed are so he's using gamelan the same kind of way I am, where it's like incorporated into ostinatos. Elmer Bernstein, though his influence on me tends to be more Americana with his westerns and To Kill a Mockingbird, it was still the way that he would place themes very, very clearly that had a huge influence on me. John Williams, you know, obviously, I think for me on Rings of Power, the John Williams influence is actually mostly drawn from his output in the last 20 years, less so than like the heyday of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Like for me, it's like Minority Report, War of the Worlds. If you listen to the horror cues in Rings of Power, Under the Floorboards from 102, it's like Barry's kidnapping from Close Encounters. What I love about John Williams' tension writing is that he's drawing from Penderecki and Ligeti, but in a way that still sounds like him. Whereas like Kubrick would just license those atonal masters and just put them in the movie. And I've always enjoyed those techniques via John Williams' lens, the woodwind writing.
And actually, the first thing I'm sure that you noticed in my tweets, but that's one of the things that just leapt out to me every time I hear those crazy like chromatic lines. Like that's immediately John Williams magic ET like.
Yes, and yet yes, and they're also, to me, they're Ravel. They're French. They're Ravel and Debussy, and Stravinsky as well. Obviously not French, but that kind of John Williams drew liberally from those woodwind colors, and for me also like those kind of solo woodwinds, telling those kind of stories were part of the joy of Rings of Power, was getting to use those kind of colors. Those are the obvious influence. Oh, James Horner, my God, and Ennio Morricone. James Horner, Ennio Morricone were the other two. Ennio Morricone, I mean, check out The Mission.
Yes, just from reading your blog, I think it was part 3 of your Lord of the Rings Power blog, where you made like this proper list. I decided to check out. Rather, the truth is, I already knew about all these guys, but like I decided to like fill out the gaps in my knowledge. It was like, just seriously, thank you for giving like people like me like a way of perhaps, I don't know, it's like obviously they were always there. I could always have found like know that their music was good, and like they have huge Wikipedia pages, of course. But it takes something like that, or somebody saying, "Hey, look at this place," and you can find stuff like Patton, Cinema Paradiso, Glory. I had not watched these movies like 2 months ago before I knew that we were gonna do this interview, and now I have. So thank you for that.
Ah, well, fantastic. I love knowing that, and that's how I discovered Bernard Herrmann, you know, another one of my big influences. Bernard Herrmann I was aware of him, but when I met Elmer Bernstein, you know, his hero growing up was Bernard Herrmann. And then I also realized like Danny Elfman was massively influenced by Nino Rota and Bernard Herrmann. So much so that when I started digging into Bernard Herrmann, I was like, oh my God, like that is Batman 1989. It just is. And in a way that like, and Danny wore that influence on his sleeve proudly. And in the same way that I'm like, yeah, go check out Conan the Barbarian. Like I'm borrowing this style, and in a way being upfront about it and being able to share with other people, if that makes other people go listen to his music, I think it's a win across the board, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like literally, you can almost see it like a set of babushka dolls, like going smaller and smaller, like everybody
Yes.
influences more and more people. So it's like, or like a tree, perhaps is the better comparison because it spreads out,
Absolutely.
and more
of course,
people gathers inspiration and includes it, and new generations of fans.
and no one invents anything. I mean, John Williams was borrowing liberally from Dimitri Tomkin and Max Steiner, as liberally as I'm borrowing from Basil Polidorus, where you listen and the influence is so obvious. But what were they borrowing from? They were coming from Western orchestral symphonic tradition. And where was that coming from? That was coming from, then you just start working your way back through, classical music and liturgical music. Everybody's building on what came before. So I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that and know that, no art is made in a vacuum, and truly art that is new for the sake of being new usually ends up being very dated and not aging well. So for me, when I got this gig,
you're really not gonna put a Korean K-pop band in one of the seasons of
I might. They're big now. Let's get Blackpink to guest on season 2. My 8-year-old daughter would be happy.
My sister would too.
Yeah, but it's something that I am so grateful to all these composers. Shirley Walker was on that list. I'm so grateful to them for influencing me that I feel almost like obligated to make sure people know that this is where some of these ideas are originating. And
it's a handing of a baton in some way.
It is, and that's what's interesting is as I started scoring Rings of Power, in order to do it, I really had to channel a very primordial part of my being. And part of this is just generational. The Howard Shore Lord of the Rings scores were not that. Why were they not that? Because I was 21 when they came out. I already had been wanting to do film music for 16 years. And they were an influence on me for sure. But when I really connect back with that, like the things that make me who I am are the scores I discovered between the ages of like 5 and 15. And that's all the scores I just described. You know what I mean? So it was interesting. Like, yes, I want to definitely channel my love for the Howard Shore scores, but also to be able to do an authentic, emotional piece of music, I needed to like also reconnect with all these other composers and colors that I thought could be a supportive texture for the Rings of Power.
I don't know if you have, maybe you've been talking in articles and interviews about your relationship with Shore, that you had chance to talk with him and perhaps discuss your ideas. Did he ever actually suggest anything, or was he like, tell me what you got?
It was, by the time we connected,
Did he workshop anything, so to say?
No, the answer is no, because I was almost done. I mean, by the time we spoke, I was in the second half of the show, and the themes had been done. I mean, I was full steam ahead. And then he came back and wrote his came back to Middle Earth to write his the main title. So it was really personal. It was really like, it was actually the perfect time for me, because rather than sort of connecting over creative questions and challenges, it was more like I was in the middle of the biggest run of work I'd ever done in my life. I was exhausted, really. I mean, rounding the corner, getting in episode 6 almost killed me. Yeah. And being able to say to Howard Shore, hey man, how do you hang on? Like, what do you do when like this gets that intense? And like, not like, what do you do harmonically and melodically? I mean, like, what do you do in the day to keep you going? What are your, what are mental things do you do? What do you do to clear your head? What do you tell yourself to keep going? And he was really generous with his time and support in that way. And so in a way, right, like I spoke to Howard when I needed him the most, which was really at that point when it's like chips are down and I'm only halfway through this thing and I'm like, I'm dying. you know, then to be able to like talk with the guy who scored these movies and made 6 of them, and you know, it was a part of his life for more than a decade. It was like inspiring, and even though our experiences are very different and our workloads are very different, it was really cool, you know, to be able just to ask him what his, you know, what his creative process is like. And really we talked about that more than the music by a wide margin. It was really just sort of like a personal connection.
Then we can finally let rest people who are constantly saying, hey, was this inspired by a thing from Lord of the Rings? Because I've seen it like basically every week somebody suggesting something new was actually from the Lord of the Rings films. You have been very clear since you've started speaking about this series that it's not, that you can't. Like, so,
you know, but here's where they're right? That I've already said that you know, the Lord of the Rings scores by definition were not in that initial group of scores that made me want to be a composer because of my age. Ever since I saw The Fellowship of the Ring on opening night, Howard Shore's scores for the Lord of the Rings have influenced everything I've ever done. They're just in there. It's part of the vernacular of film. I bring it up in spotting sessions. I mean, I remember on Walking Dead, just, you know, it's like, oh, this is like Helm's Deep. And everyone's like, yeah. It's part of the way we talk about film. And it's just a shorthand that I've used for 20 years. So it's actually impossible to say that these themes were not influenced by those movies. In the Masters of the Universe was influenced by everything I've done, is influenced in some way because they're part of my brain. But I can say that I did not make an effort to like draw a hidden meaning or a hidden connection. It's all it's all emotional connections, you know. But that's what I've mentioned several times here, you know, that like art is in the ear of the beholder. If people hear that and it helps their experience, then they're not wrong if they want to have that connection.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, you don't have to go so far as to go completely deaf of the author, but there is something to be said about like different interpretations. Like, isn't music different interpretations to begin with? Like,
totally. And there is a point at which it leaves my brain, and once it's out in the world, it is what it is. I mean, just like I said, you know, my experience watching those movies is like, those are the themes for The Ring, and I don't care what's in the book. In my head and my heart, when I watched the movies, that's what it became. And similarly, if someone said to me, you know, like, your Ring theme, but it's like, I feel like it's Sauron's theme, I feel like Sauron has 2 themes, I would be like, then when you watch Rings of Power, that's what it is. You know, and they're not wrong. I mean, I have the same kind of conundrum that Howard did, where it's like, well, there's the Ring theme and I've got a Sauron theme, and at the end of the season 1, we're hearing the Ring theme. We're not hearing the Sauron theme. What does that mean moving forward? Like, and I'm still even sort of piecing that together for myself. And conversations like this actually influence the way I think about it, you know, because like, it's a communal experience. You know, this is the experience you guys are having. I'm in the middle of, I'm getting started on season 2 now. Like, what am I going to do with some of these themes? You know, it's a dynamic experience, and we're making a thing. I'm making a thing that lives outside my brain, and so it eventually becomes something that I don't have control over, you know.
Sure. Speaking of Howard, I don't think I've seen him speak or like be interviewed or in articles at all about Rings Power. Has he become a total hermit, or like, is there any way for, does he not know that people love his opening track? Like,
you know, I have not, I don't know the answer. I have not spoken to him since the show aired. My last interaction with him was when I was writing. So I know, I don't know the answer.
It's like, I think it's crazy that there's nothing. Like, I made my last video was specifically about his opening title.
Oh yeah.
And,
I hope he knows people love it. That's,
yeah,
you know,
that's kind of my point. Like, I really hope he hasn't like closed himself off the world and living in his woods like a hobbit.
Yeah, I have no idea, but it's like, whether or not it he wants it to be part of his life on a regular basis. It's like all he has to do is sort of check in with the world and see people love it, so it's a win.
Sure. You mentioned, like in the creative process, you're talking about the different stages to work with Gilladio's theme. You have mentioned that your first take was the Bronwyn around the theme. You discarded that one. Will there perhaps be like a sort of collection of, in the works music that we get to hear? You can, like, for example, this one has like the Rarities archive, the little CD that comes with it, where you can hear like the old version of the Moria theme, for example.
Interesting. I certainly might. It would be embarrassing to share my the Harfoot themes had a really embarrassing early draft that the producers never heard. Nobody heard it. But where it was like, oh, well, basically make it like more Shire-y. You know what I mean? Like try to be more overt, and that was just like, wow, bad. But I might, and certainly like I could release a record collection of my mock-ups, which are my sketches and what the producers heard of everything you've heard. The only reason I don't is that like I honestly just don't think it would be that interesting. I mean, my mock-ups are so phenomenal. I don't mean to brag. I'm just saying like most people wouldn't even notice. They wouldn't notice the difference. They really wouldn't. I mean, if you were just listening in your car or whatever. So but I might, yeah. I mean, like theme sketches, and stuff like that. I might, it's
like,
definitely
once again, never underestimate how much stuff like Lord of the Rings fans are willing to digest.
Yeah, well, you know what? Knowing that there's some interest out there, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
and keep that in mind with your future themes that you're working on too. If you put something in the bin, like consider if somebody will want to know what stages the theme went through in the future.
Yeah.
That sounds like an awful lot of pressure. Like now we're gonna scrutinize even the work that you're
not.
Yeah,
they're digging through the trash and finding the discarded themes.
I thought it was very interesting what you spoke about. Then put on your blog, musical continuity, not quotation. That's been part of what we've been talking about all along. Have you considered that's a bit similar to what Tolkien himself said, that he wants the Lord of the Rings books to be applicable, not an allegory. Like he doesn't want people to read the Lord of the Rings and say, "Oh, this is an allegory of the Second World War." He wants it to be applicable, so you can think of it like that. You can think of it like your own personal struggles. You can think of it like other significant events.
I mean, at every opportunity for us as people involved in the show to return to Tolkien, we've always benefited from that. So, I mean, I definitely think that there was a direct influence there, and he felt that allegory, I mean, if I could summarize, right, that allegory lessened your reading. And in a way, I actually found that like he was very clear about it, to the point that like if some people wanted to read allegory, then they're just going to read allegory. You can't prevent them from doing it if that's where their brain goes. But yeah, I felt I definitely felt that like if possible, just like he was, if I could set some parameters of your expectations, because I didn't want people to read like you were describing, like, oh, wait, where's the quotation to the Peter Jackson movies? And it's like, it's not there. You can look for it, but I'm telling you right now, it's not there. So if that helps, then it's a good thing. But I do think that like Tolkien it was helpful for him to be forthcoming about that, and even just as a fan, as a reader, like I gotta say, like, I mean, it's hard not to read allegory sometimes, so even though he said, well, don't do that, it's like, okay, but like my brain goes where my brain goes, you know what I mean? And so it's interesting to just sort of, in a way, it's reminded me that, we all have in our own heads what this thing is. That's the, and I don't mean the movies, I mean the books.
Yeah, of course.
So every time there's an adaptation, there's like you you're bringing with it what you love, and you're also bringing with it what you expect. And in a way, that's what makes adaptation so tricky, you know, is that it exists in your mind in a certain way. And I think that what was interesting about Tolkien's comment about that is he was sort of addressing the fundamental truth, which is that it's all going to be in your head once you read it. And that he was asking, you know, don't read allegory if you can avoid it, you know, which I thought was cool that he was clear about that.
I mean, it's a bit of stepping off the pedestal as the author to say that I have the sole interpretation, which is once again what we've been talking about several times around these scores and about these shows and everything about that. Like, it's fun to see interpretations and see like connections that you yourself would necessarily have made. Like, it makes it something to do instead of just something that is.
Yeah, and it's drawing from this incredible source material and driving people towards it, and that's it's really exciting, you know. And to me, like, I don't know, I don't think that Tolkien ever even attempted to novelize the events that we're seeing in Rings of Power. I mean, he seemed like he decided at a certain point that he wanted to create this lore. Like, he wanted to spend his remaining years not flushing out like he did with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but to like shift gears. And in a way, it makes it fun to think that, like, well, he knew all these stories were there. I mean, he put them there, but it's like he didn't spend his time writing them. So it's like, this is our interpretation of it, and someone else will do a different interpretation of it, and other people will write a song about it, and other people create this artwork about it. And it's all drawing from, like, he knew that, like, what he wanted to do was lay out this framework that other people would draw from. So I feel like, in a way, the entire show is honoring his philosophy about what he was doing.
I mean, technically, if you don't like it, you don't have to watch it. If you don't, if you don't
not
like the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson, you don't have to watch that either. Like, the books will always be there. You can just have them if you want. Like,
totally.
Yeah. Well, I think we've passed through most of the things I thought about asking about. You don't have any fun spoilers for the next season?
Is there? I do not. I mean,
I hear what's the first? If there is a new theme, can I hear the first note? There we have it, folks.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen.
Exclusive access to the first note of season 2. There we go.
Yeah. Before we go, I'm just curious, is there anything you want me to address in my blogs specifically? Like, is there any question, or, you know what, you could even throw it out to your fans and followers, like, now would be the time to tag me, because I'm going to start posting in about a month from now. So
yeah, obviously I've been already going through it, like translations and lyrics and things like that. It's very interesting to try to find
that is I'm translating many of the big moments, not every single cue, but, if you know, many of that's going to be in there for sure.
And I know, perhaps if there are some, like, if I compare with your God of War or Godzilla blogs, for example, it's very much focused on the themes. I would just find it very interesting to see some more, like, quieter moments, or like just some just moments in general that you like. For example, one that I mentioned in my, like, retrospectives that I did, like, last week was, for example, I love that melody from episode 7 when Theo sees his what he thinks is his dead mother, and you hear that. Something like that. I'm not sure if I got tempo right or anything, but, like, I was sitting for the longest time and thinking, is that from some theme or something? And I just came to the conclusion, no, it's not. It's just a beautiful melody. Sung by Raya, no less, right?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful song.
Thank you. Yeah, no, there never let it be said that I can sometimes just write something new. Oddly, Nola Matar was that as well. It was just like a really kick-ass action scene, and I was thinking, like, this just needs to be something new. And that ended up being one of my favorite moments in the whole score. Well, I'm definitely going. I appreciate you bringing that up. I am getting into that kind of granular detail. You'll find the first 3 blog entries are emphasizing the themes because it's more about the first time you're being introduced to all of them. But from episode 4 onward, there are a couple new ideas. The Mystics theme comes in, this Wandering Day, but basically it's not about the themes anymore. It's about how I'm using them and how they're interacting and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious what you think of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about it. And yeah, I hope at least something that we talked about today could have influenced them, so it doesn't just become like a repeat of the same information twice for people watching both this and then reading the blogs.
But also I just appreciate your enthusiasm and yeah, man, I hope you keep enjoying what I'm working on in the future.
That's great. Thanks for showing up, and I enjoy seeing what you bring to us in future.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.